Good evening, everybody. This is really a treat. I get to introduce a new author, new to you, new to me, with this absolutely wonderful book called Sleeping Bear by Connor Sullivan. And not by chance, but by design, his father, Mark, is joining us this evening. Mark and the Poison Pen have a long relationship. And in fact, we had a wonderful event with Mark earlier this year. Way before then, we did Beneath the Scarlet Sky. And then this time, Mark, it's Green Valley, but I can't remember the whole title.
Last Green Valley.
Thank you. The Last Green Valley, which is a
Right?
super book. And Mark has really found some amazing World War II stories that were certainly unknown to me and unknown to you, and curiously enough, seem to emanate from Montana. How did that happen, Mark?
It's a total, fluke that it happened that way. One of these coincidences. My agent told me to go knock on every door in that neighborhood where I heard the story, the same little neighborhood. She said, "You have a career in that neighborhood." So,
Well, obviously you do. It's really been wonderful to do both of those books with you, but we had a long history before that. So Connor, how wonderful that we get to start with you on your first book. And this is a book that has had a very long gestation, has it not?
Yeah, I mean it's 5 years in the making from idea to publishing. So yeah, around 5 years.
So did you catch a writing bug from your father, or was this your very own disease?
Well, so growing up, I wanted to be a professional skier. When I was 19 years old, I got in a really bad accident in New Zealand, and it kind of ruined my ski career. I tried to come back from it, but my leg was just too mangled, and the injury was just too severe. But it was around that time that I really started to toy with the idea of being a writer. And, I think it was around a year or so until I finally approached my parents and told them that's what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps and go to school for writing and kind of just go all in on it. And that's what I did. And that was around 9 years ago, 8 years ago.
So is that really scary to have a father who's such a successful writer?
Um, Yeah, I think it was intimidating at first. I think the most intimidating part was telling him that I wanted to be a writer. Um, because, when your parent is a writer and you see all the ups and downs of a writing career, you see, the incredible highs and you see the incredible lows. And, you know, I wouldn't say he was at an incredible low when I told him this, but it wasn't like the high that he's been on in the last 4 years. But, because of seeing that wave of a career, I really came into this with open eyes, and that's kind of how I've tackled it. So like, from where we are right now. So,
It probably was a really good lesson in reality, though, to have tracked Mark's career. Mark, was it scary for you to see Connor wanting to step into this world where it's certainly been a fascinating one for you with its ups and downs?
sure. There was a voice inside of me wanted to scream, "No, you'd be insane," right? But I asked him enough questions to find out he was passionate about storytelling, and he's a good storyteller. He already was, and he was already a good writer even at that point. And I wished him Godspeed, and I said, "There's only one way to do this," and I said, "You just have to go at it 100%. You cannot hold back. You have to give it everything you've got, and you have to become the best writer you can be." And I said, "That should be your approach. And you got to understand it's going to take years to become that writer." So,
Well, that was excellent advice. We're leaving a third writer out of this discussion, a very good friend of ours whom we have spent virtually his entire career with, and that's Greg Hurwitz. And you give a lot of credit, Connor, to Greg in your acknowledgments in the book. So what role did Greg play? We should talk about that before we actually move into Sleeping Bear.
yeah, so I've known Greg since I was probably 12 years old. And, he's kind of like an uncle to me in a way. And, he used to come over when I was 12 and we played foosball downstairs. And you just like, it was so cool to see him turn into the author that he is. I mean, I've known him since I was a little kid. And I think, when I look back on it, I went to school in Los Angeles. I went to school at USC, and I was studying film and creative writing and screenwriting. And on the weekends, I would be up at Greg's house, having dinner with his family. And, even during school, he was always kind of coaching me on more of the lifestyle of a writer. And I got to see firsthand, like, oh, I'd hang out with him in his office while he was writing, and I was organizing his bookshelf, because he'd always give me these odd jobs in college and even after college when I was a struggling writer. And I just got to see, someone of his success in the thriller world. I got to see his day to day. And, he never helped me on my writing, but he helped me again, like how my dad helped me. And that was, what does it take to be a writer? And, there's this really kind of infamous story now of, I was over for lunch one day. I was organizing his bookshelf, and I sat down with him and his wife, Delina, and we were having lunch. And I told him, I said, I think I was a senior at the time in school, and I've already carved out 4 hours a day to write on my own. And he just looks at me and he goes, those are rookie numbers. You need to be doing at least 12 to 14 hours. And I just looked at him and I'm like, what? And that's him. That's Greg. He is an absolute machine. And, he'd probably watch this right now and be like, yeah, I did say that, because that's what you needed to do. And I really took that advice. I mean, I couldn't just sit down and do 12 hours or 14, but over the years and over the months since then, I really got in that rhythm of doing those incredible hours. So,
Well,
I think
yeah, I mean, Greg is a wonderful mentor, as you point out, for his lifestyle. But I mean, he's so interested in the craft of writing, and he's written so many different kinds of things. And, coming to the Nowhere Man took years of preparation. And Mark, you wrote a lot of really wonderful books before you wrote Beneath the Scarlet Sky, which I think is currently shaping your career. But you must have learned a ton from doing that.
Oh, I absolutely learn from every single book, and every single book has its challenge. And as you meet those challenges and write in an interesting way year after year after year, you have to keep raising the bar on yourself. You have to keep, otherwise I think you just become disinterested at some level. And I was always trying to push it, and making that shift to stories that had a historical bent just clicked with me. And but I had to learn a lot about a different way of writing to do those books, for sure.
Well, you probably couldn't have written those books, before. I mean, it takes a lot to advance yourself to the point where you can tackle a more difficult story. But I give Connor lots of points, because this is certainly a complicated book. And before I ask you to talk to Connor about his book, I would like to tell you, Connor, that you have inspired me and my husband to a road trip. Because we have a really good friend who lives in Homer, Alaska, and we have an adorable dog that we would like to travel with, but we have not mastered any way to get her on the plane. So I told him about your book, and I said to him, maybe we should just drive. So we are planning next May a road trip from Scotts. This is assuming the Canadian border opens, or we can manufacture a compelling reason for Canada to let us across the border, which isn't easy. But we're going to drive from Scottsdale. We're going to drive up through Wyoming and stop and visit friends. We're going to go through maybe a bit of Idaho and Montana, and we're going to drive up through the Yukon, and we are eventually going to get to Alaska. Now, if we are waylaid by sinister Russians, it's going to be all your fault. So it's a wonderful book. And in part, I think it's a visit for many of us to a territory that we're not that familiar with. Those of you who've taken cruises to Alaska, you may have stopped in some of the ports and you've seen, which is at Skagway, where you can actually see, the photographs of the Yukon Gold Rush and people going up over the mountain and the whole bit. But if you see it from the water, it's clearly not going to be the same as if you're driving up and seeing it from the other side of the mountain. So did you do that before you wrote this book? Is this territory that you've driven through?
No, it's not. When I first came up with the idea of the book, and when I was writing it for the first couple of years, I was dirt poor living in LA. I couldn't even, attempt a kind of trip like that. So Google became my best friend. And I mean, I feel like I know that area like I've lived there for 5 years, because in a way I have. I've read everything about it online, books, Google Maps. It was just, I just went all in, travel guides, travel brochures about Eagle, Alaska, in that area. I would love to make that trip at one point. Dad, I think you've made a trip.
Yeah, I've been up
What?
there.
Yukon.
I've
Yeah.
been up there 3 times.
Yeah.
In that triangle twice, for quite a long time, 10 days and 12 days for 2 different trips.
Yeah.
So
So
did you get a chance to critique the book from that, from your?
oh yeah, for sure. And he had it. He had the terrain nailed, because that is the beauty of Google Earth. You can go and sort of fly over it and look right at it. And it's not the same as being on the ground, but boy, in an era of pandemic, et cetera, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good second. So
Well, beware, Connor. Now that I have your email, if I take this drive and I decide you screwed up, you're going to hear from me.
you're going to see spectacular terrain. There's no doubt about it. You'll be amazed. And Homer is a really cool place. Make time to go and take the trip to the Fjords National Park. It's fantastic. You'll probably see whales and everything. It's cool.
Well, I've had way too much to say so far, Mark. So since this is an opportunity to talk to your son and ask him to talk about his book, why don't I just shut up and let you do that?
So where did it start? Where did the idea start? Because you originally were working on a book that was set in the Bacan. And then,
that was like my thesis in school, and for a screenplay. A movie I was writing was an idea of, I guess it was around 6 years ago. We were having this huge oil boom in the Bakken in North Dakota, and the Bakken is a massive oil reserve where kind of all the fracking takes place. And around 6 years ago, 5 years ago, the minimum wage in the Bakken was like $55 an hour. So everyone was flooding there to work, and people were becoming, I mean, I think a starting salary was like almost $150,000 a year to work on one of these oil rigs. So people were flooding there, and I wrote a screenplay my senior year about that. And then a lot of things started catching on in Hollywood about that, and there were a couple pilots made, and some maybe some movies made about it. But it was around that time I was interning at Warner Brothers, and I was eating lunch at the commissary, and I was just looking at my phone, and I stumbled upon an article that I can't for the life of me find anymore. And that article was about how many missing people how many missing people a year go missing in Alaska, specifically that triangle. And it was something like over 2,000 a year. And I said, that can't be right. So I started to do my own research, and it was, since the state of Alaska started keeping track in 1988, there's been, probably around 90,000 people by now who have gone missing, and who haven't been found. So I looked at that, and I immediately said, well, here's a thriller. And then I went to Google Maps, and I zoomed out on this massive landmass, and I saw it's literally the size of Texas, and most of it is untouched. There's no roads in most of these places. You get from place to place by bush plane. And as my mind started going, I started zooming further out and further out, and I saw, well, there is the Bering Sea, and there is Russia. And all of a sudden, these ideas started coming to my head, and we ended up with what I have for Sleeping Bear. After 20 drafts in 5 years, we got to where we are now.
I thought it was a great idea right from the get-go. I was like, that can't possibly be true. And he said, it's true. It's true. People vanish up there without a trace. And if you think of the numbers in your head, we're talking 6 to 7 people a day.
Yep.
Right? Just go missing, nothing. And some of them, we talked about it at length. Some of them had to be animal, that there was some mistake made. They got themselves into a situation and they were eaten. Except when people have gone to some of these places where they've known the people, they don't find clothes and fabric in the bear scat. right? And there
Yeah.
are all these crazy things about it, but it's just without a trace is literally what happens.
Yeah, and the research I did on it very extensively in talking to people who live up there. A lot of it has to do with people who just don't want to be found. You get 2 strikes, 2 felonies in California. Well, third one, you get life in prison. So what do? You go up to Alaska and you live off the grid. And then there's a lot of people who just, you break your ankle back there, you get turned around, gone. And that's the majority of, how these people disappear. But in terms of a thriller, it was at that time I was working at Warner Brothers, and I was reading, hundreds, if not, 1,000 scripts over a year or two. And what I was always seeing is that studios and were really looking for high concept ideas that they could launch a franchise off of, ideas that are very easy to pitch in a log line. And, I could have written a contained thriller that takes place in Alaska, but instead I had this idea that was very high concept that I hadn't seen done before, that terrified me. And I knew that if I could write it with confidence and I could write it where it does seem plausible or believable, I'd really have something there. Even though, again, that did terrify me because I'd never seen anything like this. Something that starts off as a woman goes missing in the woods thriller that turns into a political thriller. And Dad, I don't know if you remember this, but around 2 years ago, when I was really kind of getting done with the draft that ended up being sold, I came to you and I said, I think I just wasted 5 years of my life because I haven't seen anything like this. And you said, that's a good thing. Yes. Because it is different.
Yeah.
And you ended up being right. So
right. And the thing I thought was very shrewd of you was that you made a decision not to explain why everybody was vanishing. You asked the question, well, who could take advantage of it? And then why? Mm-hmm. And the fact that you came up with how this works is, a testament to your imagination. So well done.
Thank you.
I'm not sure that people realize, living down here, just how close to Russia we are in Alaska. I mean, we can intellectually know that people walked across the old ice bridge, from that part of the world and came down and populated the Americas. But unless you've been there, we did, my husband and I signed up for the first Northwest Passage cruise that was not, expedition cruise, but it was on Crystal. And we went all the way around Alaska. We started below Anchorage. What's the big port, no, not it's on the south end, it's like straight south of Anchorage. And it's where everybody starts. Cruise ships go up there from Vancouver or from Seattle and then turn around and come back again. Anyway, it'll come to me. Then we went to the Kodiak Peninsula, and then we went out past the Aleutian Islands, and then we sailed up and went through the Bering Sea, and then all the way around Alaska to the Smoking Cliffs, and then on across.
So you were close.
Sorry?
You were close to Russia.
Well, that was the thing. Until I took that trip, even though I knew intellectually, until we were actually in the Bering Sea, and and it's like 3 miles or something. You can see Russia. Yeah. It's scary to realize just how close we are. But it certainly, Connor, makes your book very plausible once you accept that reality that we're practically touching each other.
Yeah.
So scary. How did you deal with being scared?
How did I deal with the uncertainty of writing the book?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of it was my dad. I mean, everyone always asks me, did your dad write your book for you? Did your dad help you write? And the answer is just,
I did not do that.
I know you didn't, but the answer is no. And I always tell this other story. When I did graduate school, I got an apartment with my wife. I had a room in that apartment where I made my office, and Greg actually gave me all of his old stuff. Like, he gave me the desk that he wrote 19 novels on. And that was the desk that I wrote Sleeping Bear on. He gave me bookshelves and everything. And I remember I got a computer, I had Microsoft Word, I got a fancy keyboard, I sat down that first day of being a writer out of school, and I opened Microsoft Word, I looked at that blank screen and I stared at it for 20 minutes. And all I realized, I had no idea how to write. I just spent 4 years in school at writing school, and I had no idea what I was doing. I remember I called my dad and I freaking out and I said, Dad, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to write. And he just goes, figure it out. And he hangs up on me. And that was, and I know that may sound cruel, but that was the best thing he's ever done, because I had to find my own voice. I had to decide what kind of writer I wanted to be. And then I just had to spend years, with my butt in the chair, working on this craft that I had no idea how to do it. And, if you say, I would say dealing with the uncertainty, and one thing my dad has really helped me on over the years is kind of the mental aspect of it. When I'm getting overwhelmed or I feel like I'm not good enough, if I feel like I have imposter syndrome, he really kind of calms me down, makes me look at the problem, and then just execute on that problem. So I would say that's kind of how I dealt with that uncertainty.
Oh, good for you, Dad. Tough love. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, well, yeah. There was also advice given for sure. People asked, what I gave them the same advice that I've given virtually everyone who's ever asked me, what does it take to be a writer, and how do you go about becoming a novelist? And I always told him, and I tell them, that the best thing you can do is find a genre that you love to read, or the kind of book you love to read, and read widely, read the best stuff, and then read it again and tear it apart and figure out how they did it. How did the drama work? And I've probably told that to 1,000 people, and he's one of the very few who actually did it on his own. And so it helped that independently of me, Greg told him the same thing. Mm-hmm. So that helped. It was reinforcing. He was getting the same message from someone who wasn't his dad, right? Which is very good. But
so Conrad, I never asked you this question, because after 31 years of reading for voice, because I've been an editor for a long time too, probably 800 books or something. And here's always been my philosophy. As an editor, I can help you with everything except if you're boring. There's nothing I can do if you're boring, that's just the way it is. So I read for voice. I don't really care what the plot is, characters come and go, the whole 9 yards. But the thing that I think we're really good at the Poison Pen is reading for voice and finding new authors. And, I read your book, and your voice is nothing like your dad's, so it never even occurred to me that he had helped you write the book, because you're very different. I've read all your dad's books. So, I'm very familiar with his voice and how he writes. And yours is definitely different. I did sort of listen, because I cheated and read the acknowledgments first. I kind of listened for Greg. I was thinking that there might be some Hurwitz in this book more than there would be Mark. And Mark, let me ask you this: did writing with Jim Patterson in any way change your voice?
Writing with Jim is like an amalgamation, right? You kind of come to a middle ground. And so it taught me that you can change your voice, you can alter it. And, if you can alter it well and have it impact the thematic stuff you're trying to do in a book, it can be even more richer, right? It's not just an interesting way the story's being told. It's deeper than that if you get it. And he's all about it. He's all about trying different voices to see if it works. So I got that. The thing that I try to tell people about what impressed me about Connor was that there was probably a 2-year period where I did not see the manuscript. There was an initial period of about 2 years, I guess, where I was looking at it every once in a while. And then he went all in on the woodshed and came back and said, what do you think? And I told my wife, well, we'll see how long it goes till he screws up, right? And then I go 50 pages, no screw up, 50 pages, no screw up, another 100, no screw up, another 100. And then finally he screws up. So I basically called him up and I said, if you fix this one issue, this is a publishable book. And I meant it. It wasn't just because he was my kid. It totally glued my interest, and I knew it could be even better. So I said, if this is where you're starting, boy, this is going to be a published book.
And just for the record, that screw up was my favorite chapter in the whole book. And I remember when I think you read the whole thing and then I said, "What do you think about that chapter?" And you looked at me and you goes, "That's the only thing you need to cut." I was devastated because it was just perfect to me. But it was right. I mean, in the end, and what that was, it was just basically at the climax, I gave this whole background of a character, and right when the action should just be kept going, and it ended up being right. But
there's a famous, actually, I had a conversation with David Bell earlier this week, and the title of his new book is Kill All Your Darlings, which is in fact the advice that is often given to authors, is that the thing you love the most in your book, your darling, is the one you need to kill because it distracts from the story. So Connor, be honest, how many pages did you throw away finding your voice?
I don't even know. I mean, it's to the point where I wrote that book 20 times. I mean, I heard it. I had a screenwriting teacher in LA who said that you need, before you can even enter a room, like a writing room, you need to have at least, I think he said, like a foot of paper that you've written, that you've thrown away, that you've tried and toiled over. And I could easily double or triple that. I mean, I was writing in those years, those incubation years or whatever. I mean, I was writing all day every day, and I was just writing crap. And it wasn't until I got very specific with what I wanted to write, after a couple of years of just writing nonsense, I really started to reread Vince Flynn again, and I went, aha, that is what I want to do. I want to kind of bring the new generation of this genre to light and take a crack at it. I think my dad always used to tell me, study a genre, see what it doesn't have, and bring something new to the table. And that was really what I did. But I got to be honest, when I was writing Sleeping Bear, I'd be writing it and I would just shake my head. I go, there is no way this is going to be published. Like, I've just never seen anything like it. And then, you just work at it and you work at it. And yeah, so I would say like 3 stacks. It's so many, like, it's crazy.
So it was a brave choice for you in a way to make this a female-led. Cassie Gale, the Army veteran who we meet on the opening pages. And, why did you decide to write about a woman instead of a guy?
It wasn't a cognitive decision. I just had the character in my head, and same with Jim Gale, same with her father. It was just a character that both characters just came to me. And it wasn't like I was chasing a trend, because at that time in Hollywood, everyone was looking for a female lead, a strong female lead. And I never really thought of that. I was just writing what I wanted to write and the characters that I wanted to write about.
So why don't you tell us a brief synopsis, at least, of how, unfortunate part of doing this right now is we can't talk about the whole book. We can only, get people's appetites whetted by talking about the beginning of it. So why don't you give us a synopsis here of the opening parts of the book?
Yeah, so the book is about, well, the main protagonist is Cassandra Gale. She's around 31, 32 years old. She is the 3rd woman to ever graduate Ranger training. So she's basically she graduated the training for special forces, even though she has not gone on deployment, because I don't think they still can. I don't think women can still do active combat roles. That might have changed this year. So basically an unfortunate tragedy happened in her life, and we meet her when she's going to Alaska to try to start anew, trying to get away from it all. And when she's going up to start a new job, she is camping one night and something happens to her and she disappears. And the story is about where she ends up and her father, who has a very shadowy past, and decides to go look for her. And when that happens, this whole thing unravels in Russia. And I'll say that. And so, yeah,
Yep. So it could have really been a father-son book, but instead it's a father-daughter book. Mark, how did you feel about that? Did you think that was an interesting choice?
Yeah, I thought it was sharp because it would challenge him. Right? He had to do something outside of his comfort zone, and I've always found that whenever you do that kind of thing, your writing usually goes to a different level. I mean, I did it in one of my own books, The Purification Ceremony, and that book kind of changed my life at a certain level, and it was all because I was willing to try to write convincingly as a woman. So I applauded it when he did it.
My friend Dana Stabenow has always talked to me about Suicide by Alaska, going back to your, discussion about how many people disappear. The
Yeah.
other truthful thing she said to me, and it was one of her books, maybe her fifth book or something, she pointed out to me that in a frontier state often attracts people from the radical right and the radical left, because it is a place where you can have new beginnings and reinvent yourself. Arizona's been a state too long now, so we don't really still have that frontier thing, but we do get lots of people who move there and you don't know who they are. I mean, that's where the private investigator gig has gone today, is doing background checks and you meet somebody and then you wonder, is this person really who he or she says they are? Because you don't have any way of knowing if they moved from New Hampshire, or wherever they might have come from. But I do think Alaska is a fascinating place in that, you do get people who can go there to reinvent themselves, but you also get people who go there who have absolutely no idea what's really waiting for them. The risk that you can take, and how easy it is to, as she says, suicide by Alaska, not intentional, but just works out that way. So that could have been what happened to Cassie, right?
Yeah. And that was kind of one of their fears, is that it was suicide by Alaska. It's funny. I was just talking to Mark Cameron today, and he was I think he was a U.S. Marshal for almost 30 years in Alaska. And he has these wild stories. And we're actually going to do an event tomorrow night at the Country Bookshelf in Bozeman. It'll be virtual. And he was telling me today that he's had a lot of experience with village public safety officers and, the Alaska State Troopers and the Bush Troopers. And so hopefully he's going to tell me some stories about that tomorrow night. I'm very interested to hear. And I wish I knew him before I wrote the book so I could really pick his brain. But yeah, he's
a fascinating guy. He's writing Tom Clancy Sr., the Jack Ryan Sr. books. But I just did a conversation with him about his most recent Alaska book. And he's full of wonderful stories. So I'm sure, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to write another book about Alaska. Have you given thought to what you're going to work on next?
Yep. So I'm finishing up book number 2 right now. It is it's not a continuation of Sleeping Bear. When I was writing Sleeping Bear, and by the time I finished it, I was so sick of it, I never wanted to look at it again. I was just done. But now I've been away from it for about a year and a half. I'm really starting to kind of get that itch of, I will eventually write a sequel. It just won't be immediately, but I am starting, hopefully the beginning of a very long, lucrative series right now about some people that we know and I've kind of grown up around in Montana. So
it's amazing how Montana has inspired so many authors and so many stories. Is it Bozeman in particular? Missoula? I was trying to think, back in the Crumley era, there were so many people. Was it Bozeman they were clustered around, or where?
Well, Livingston and Missoula were the
Livingston.
Yeah, I think it's because it attracts a certain kind of person. You have to be a pretty hardy person, and you have to be someone who enjoys big, rugged places that are frankly dangerous. And we always have, Connor and his brother and my nephew grew up basically, traipsing around the mountains with me and skiing and doing all this stuff. So they really had a good understanding of what it takes to, be in a place like Alaska, because they've seen just the effects of Montana on people who don't respect it. It really will punish you, just because of the terrain and the various aspects of it. And it doesn't seem to matter if it's a river, a mountain, a lake. There's always something about it that's potentially dangerous in Montana.
It's also a border state, and so is Alaska. If you're, and there's so much attention to our southern border. I don't know that we pay enough attention to the fact that, when I was talking to Paul Dwyron, he writes in Maine. Maine's a border state, but do we really think of it that way? Or Kent Kruger in Minnesota, or people writing in Montana and so forth? And certainly Alaska, all along its eastern edge, is is a border state. So there's a lot of interesting stuff. I think border states are just, there's a lot more fluidity. There's a lot more, I don't even know how I want to describe it. I mean, in Arizona, unfortunately, it's a hostile rather than a welcoming situation. But would that be true in Montana? I mean, do we look at Canadians with hostility? We're not even looking at them right now because we can't go there. But I mean, if we were going there, I've always thought that the northern border was extremely friendly.
You want to answer that one, Connor?
I mean, yeah, it is. I wouldn't say there's animosity. I wouldn't say there's necessarily any. I mean, it's very easy to cross into Canada and then cross into the United States when there's, when the before times of COVID. So, I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, what would you say then?
I would say that they're just too nice to be villains.
All okay.
So there's some of that, but Connor is right. I mean, the northern border is porous. If you get away from the actual crossing points, there are incredible number of ways you could come from Canada into the state of Montana alone.
Oh, yeah.
And we've been in a lot of them right up on the border, just exploring and doing stuff. So
yeah, you could walk in, no problem.
Oh yeah, and you could walk in easily in a bunch of places.
Oh yeah.
Right. Plus, before the borders were artificially drawn, the native people went back and forth across the border, still do. And that makes it interesting. So, I mean, I just think it's a really fascinating place to write about. So are you thinking of your exciting series being set in Montana, or are you going to go someplace else?
Yeah, it'll be grounded in Montana. It's about these people that we know here who had these very interesting lives and have introduced me to this community, a very tightly knit, secretive community that that was their old job, overseas, operating in some of the most denied areas of the world. And the crazy part about it is that they come home and they live in Montana. They live these normal lives. They could be your neighbor, and you have no idea that these individuals have this past and these skill sets that you see in the movies, and they're just your neighbor. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And growing up, I used to read everything, but I got really into spy thrillers when I was a young teen, I'd say, and throughout my teen years. And I subconsciously, would always want to write those, but, I'd never been to Russia. I'd never been to Berlin, where, all these, Cold War spy thrillers that I loved took place. And so when I decided I want to be a writer, I was toiling with, okay, so I know Montana. I'm just a kid who grew up in Montana. How can I bring that to the genre? And then all of a sudden, these people started coming back into our lives who were spies from Montana, who moved back after 25 years of whatever they did. And, they started telling me these stories, and my mind's going crazy, and I go, this is it. And then slowly, they let me into their community, and I gained their trust, and, they gave me the green light to move forward with this. So that's the book that I'm finishing up right now.
That's a bestseller out at the moment from your same publisher, called The Paris Library. I think that's it. Paris Librarian Janice Gelson Charles, her name is. I did a very interesting conversation with her, and she created a nexus between Paris and the war and Bozeman. I mean, that's what happened. The story takes place in Paris, but at the end, the woman comes to Montana. And Mark, certainly in your last Green Valley, you're starting out in the Ukraine, and wandering all over Nazi Germany, and then way back into Russia to a concentration camp. And yet in the end, these people who came to America, came to the East Coast, ended up in Montana.
Yeah, it's a place that a friend of ours from Vermont was out visiting shortly after we moved out here about 23 years ago. And, it hadn't become the super popular place that it has become now. And she said, just driving through the state between Glacier Park and Yellowstone, is this state attracts pioneers. You have to be a pioneer to want to come here, because at the time you had to bring your own job because there wasn't a lot of jobs and you had to figure it out. And it's always attracted that kind of personality, and it continues to do it. So you have writers who first came, like I did, because it was a relatively cheap place to live, relatively. And it was everything that we could imagine in terms of an adventurous lifestyle. And, it was inevitable that it would start affecting our writing and seep into it, for sure.
How much is it changing with the influx of Californians? Because, it's certainly having an effect on life in Arizona. One hopes it will have an effect on life in Texas, but what's it doing in Montana?
I can take this one.
Okay. Of course you can.
It is, no, it's wild. And, I have nothing against Californians, but, there's a reason why people move here. They move here to be in Montana, not in California. And right now, I think Bozeman has one of the highest, I think it's one of the fastest growing towns or small cities.
Municipality.
And it's exploded to the point where, people like me can't even compete getting a starter home anymore, because it's gone up over 52% in the last year since COVID. People are buying at over $100,000 over asking. So, and there's 25 people trying to get one little house to live here. So it's definitely, it has changed a lot. But we'll see when they really experience their first Montana winter, because we had one of the most mild winters last year, and everyone was like, this is great. And it's like, well, that's not going to happen again, because you're going to have those 2 weeks of -40 below. You're just going to have it. And that's when people
flee.
Yeah.
Well, we have the opposite thing, because the same thing has happened in Scottsdale with, real estate prices and people piling in, but then they had their first day of 120 a week or so ago. And, so it's the other end of the temperature spectrum. One thing we haven't talked about Montana before we take questions is, how beautiful it is in the pull of sports. And somebody has just written a memoir about the man who wrote A River Runs Through It. And I sent it to my friend CJ Box, because it's all about fishing, and CJ is all about fishing. And I remembered how much I liked A River Runs Through It. And then I think that he wrote, I'm blanking on his name at the moment, but he wrote one mystery. And it was an absolutely wonderful mystery, beautiful book. And it's not what you would expect, from him. But I'm thinking that so many of us think of Montana, as this paradise for sportsmen, particularly fishing, wonderful rivers. There aren't any glaciers. I was lucky enough to go to Glacier when I was like 12 years old. So there were glaciers in Glacier, but no longer true. But it's just a magnificent landscape. And so is Alaska. So, I could see that would be a wonderful nexus, but give you lots of things to write about. So let's call PK back up from his black hole here and see if we have, hello, PK, there you are.
Hello.
Do we have any questions or comments from the audience? And by God, there better be Greg Hurwitz listening in here, or I'm going to write him a rude email.
Rebecca Scher wants to know about your Greg Hurwitz desk and if you still have it.
Yeah, right now. Okay, so this desk is, I call it the Game of Thrones desk, because I think he got it when he was around 19, when he got his first book deal, and he spent an ungodly amount of money on it to have a welder weld it together. And it's like 20 feet long. You can't get it into most places. So right now it's in storage because I'm living with my parents. So it was not allowed in the house. But yes, I do have that desk. You know, I'll always have that desk.
Are we
It
actually
looks
having
like
this
something you could.
conversation with the two of you in the same house?
What's that? No,
Are
no,
we
no.
having this conversation with you two in the same house?
No. He's in a different house. He's up at Flathead Lake in northern Montana.
Ah,
Yeah,
got
and
it.
I'm in his office.
I mean, that's the thing about Zoom is you don't really know where anybody is.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right, PK, where are you?
I'm at home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It didn't
Yeah.
look like the bookstore, so I was going, where are you?
I'm in my kitchen/office. So yes.
And I'm at the dining room table in the place that we own in Santa Fe, which is why the light here is so terrible, because I didn't think about it in time to fix it before I signed in. Right, so carry on. What other questions do we have?
One of our other audience members wants to know, did you know the ending of the book when you started? Or do you see where the process takes you? Has that been the case on your current book as well? And I'll open that up to both authors.
I like to kind of leave my ending open. I like to kind of know 90% of the book, at least in my head. And then I leave that last 10% or 20% open just in case things change a lot. And then I'll tweak it to the ending. But right now in the book that I'm writing, I know the ending. I'm at the point where I have to know kind of everything as I zoom through the next draft to get it finished. So.
I will have a sense by the time I'm well into the outline of what I'm going to try to do with the ending, because I'm always looking to have an impact on the reader in a way that hasn't happened yet in the story for whatever reason. So I start thinking about that and how it could work, but it's more a sense of the emotional impact I want to have on the reader at the end, and I just try to carry that with me while I'm writing.
But when you wrote Beneath the Scarlet Sky, Mark, I mean, you were basically telling the story of somebody's real life.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, you had his life really kind of mapped out the structure of the book. And that's true in The Last Green Valley too. But when you wrote your earlier thrillers, which I loved, then it was totally up to you.
It's totally up to me, yeah. And I like having this spine of a story in which I can research it enough to, in a sense, bring it to life. And I found that to be the most rewarding kind of writing I've ever done, was because it's one of those transportive experiences. And, everybody who's loves writing has had multiple transportive experiences while they're being reader, where they just fall away into the story. And that's what I love to do. That's always what I'm trying to do these days. Put the reader right there. Yeah.
So Patrick, any more?
Yeah, James Patrick Kieran wants to know what your writing schedule is like now. And do you both write during set hours? So I guess he's wanting to know the day in the life of Connor and Mark.
Yeah, I can go first. Right now I'm writing 24/7. I kind of start a little late in the morning, but then I go kind of into the night. I will take a break to obviously eat and kind of let my mind recharge. But yeah, right now it's pretty much nonstop until book number 2 is done. But in the beginning, I will have more regimented hours. I usually work in 2 4-hour sessions. So I'll do a morning session, take a 2-hour break, and then an afternoon session, and then I'll be done. But for right now, it's just, it's all day.
And I used to do that kind of thing, but I have found that through mostly by adopting and becoming a meditator, that my productivity increased when I dropped the hours that I was working. I dropped it to about 4 or 5 when I'm writing, and I'm able to lock in a way that I wasn't able to as a younger writer. And so that's what I do. I get up early in the morning, I meditate, I work out, I read a bunch of newspapers online while I'm eating breakfast. I'll probably read about something that is going to affect the day's writing that day. And 11 o'clock, I have this software that allows me to shut off the internet, except for, no, you can block certain things. So like no New York Times, no, all my little procrastinators get gone. And there's only one way out, just start writing. And so that's what I do. And I'm done by 4 or 5 o'clock.
Do you trust the process more, having written so many more books?
I do. I trust it 100%. And I don't get anxious when I'm writing anymore. I'll get frustrated with myself if I'm not writing well, but I've learned to really trust my narrative abilities, and I'll go with it.
So is that a goal for you too, Connor, is to, gain more confidence in the process?
Oh yes. I still feel like I've just started, I still feel like, it's very fresh to me. But yes, as I gain more confidence and as the years go by, I definitely would like to write in that 4 to 5 hour windows and be just as productive as I would be writing in an 8 or a 12-hour window. So that is the goal.
I'm sure your dad is right, though, that one way to accomplish that is to tune out everything. So, I have trouble doing that when I'm writing our publications for the bookstore and so forth, is that I get distracted by the little dings and, whatever it is. And I think maybe I should answer that email. And then I completely lose whatever I was doing. It's like,
And I had a screenwriting teacher early on, and his whole thing was write like it's 1992. And, all of us were like, what does that mean? And he goes, there is no distractions. Like, there's none of this in 1992. Turn everything off. For me, I have to put it physically out of the room because I get stuck on something and I go, ooh, what's going on Twitter? And then, that ends up, that's a 40-minute distraction. So I write like it's 1992.
Excellent advice. PK, anything else?
Wendy Catalano wants to let us know that Canadians are very friendly. And she wanted to give Mark a compliment. She said she's loved your books and it was a pleasure to read Connor's novel. She says, and it will be a pleasure to read Connor's novel. It sounds fascinating. So you've got a new fan there, Connor. Congratulations.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
My cue to say something that I normally say at the beginning and completely forgot, I was distracted by the terrible lighting that I've managed to find in this room, is that Connor very kindly signed autographed copies of Sleeping Bear for the Poison Pen. And so, this is your chance to get in on the ground floor to get an autograph first printing of the first edition of Sleeping Bear. Will not come your way again. So, if you don't buy in at the very beginning, it leads to chagrin later. So don't miss out. Is that it, PK? You're looking relaxed.
That's all I see at the moment. Yeah.
All right. So Mark, is there anything else you'd like to say? You, the nominal host, except I just sort of keep interrupting you.
No, that's fine. I think the book Connor's book is pretty remarkable. It absolutely holds your interest in a way that that this guy has grounded the thing in fact, again and again and again, and that's why it works, because of the research he put into it. It's pretty amazing in that respect.
How about you, Connor?
I mean, honestly, I just want to say thank you for having me. I've been watching these since COVID, I think, pretty religiously. So I like watching The Poison Pen and just learning things from other authors and from you. And it's an honor to be on here. So thank you so much.
That's very nice of you. Thank you. We've done over 500. We counted it up the other day. And my husband because he took over, we decided that we would do podcasts from these, and we crossed over the 100,000 download threshold a couple of days ago. So wow. I do hope that it has been a helpful thing during the pandemic, for readers and for writers. And I learn something every time I have a conversation. It's just amazing how intense they can be. The other Patrick, you have to be named Patrick to work at the Poison Pen, apparently. The other Patrick has pointed out that in these Zoom conversations, we can reach a depth that we don't usually get the time to do in the bookstore when you're concerned with the audience. You've got a signing line to think about, you've got a time frame to think about, and all those things. But the magic of Zoom is that we can bring people together from wildly disparate places, but then we can really drill into things. If we had time, I would love to do a whole program where we could go back and talk about the book 3 months from now, and we could assume everybody has read it. Because the most frustrating thing for me is that oftentimes it's the way the story ends. Because I mean, I'm a real believer. Minette Walters said this to me years and years ago and invented the poison pen, that a book should have an end that is as good as the beginning. And oftentimes that is not true. Oftentimes the setup is great and the idea is great, but somehow it just doesn't deliver in the end as much as it would. And I would love to be able to talk to readers more often. It's just a time problem about the full book and get their reactions to it. So I'm thinking of starting a program. I may have to get somebody else to do it next year, where we might have a bunch of follow-up events, where readers can come in. We've done 2 or 3 of them and they've been terrific. And the other thing that's amazing is that people sign, I mean, it's hard to imagine all the places that they sign in from, Bangladesh. I'm serious, it's a real global audience that Zoom has brought us. And since your book is a bit of a global book, since we're in Russia for quite a lot of it, maybe we'll have Russians who will comment. Maybe they won't tell us they're friendly like the Canadians. It'd be interesting. So I could say spasiba. Right. Anyway, thank you guys. It's really been an absolute treat to spend this time with you. PK, thanks for facilitating it this evening. Don't forget, we have autographed copies. There'll be a podcast available in a day or so. So if you know anybody that you think would enjoy this, do tell them. You just go to poisonpen.com and there's a click on podcast link. And then there's also a Facebook video link, and this will live there forever. I'll send you guys the links to both of those so that you can let other people know about them. So good night. Have a wonderful time. Give Greg my love next time you talk to him. And please give Mark Cameron my best, because it's always a pleasure to talk to him too.
I will.
All righty. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.